There's a true story about a pilot who decided to not believe his instruments and flew his plane over 1,000 miles in the wrong direction. No frequent flyer miles here. That man had a compass and rejected it. Today's common philosophy is, if it feels good, do it. But believers know that the cross is a potent reminder of the price of wrong moral choices. Today, why the cross is the only basis for morality. Stay with us. From Chicago's Moody Church, this is Running to Win with Dr. Erwin Lutzer, whose clear teaching helps us make it across the finish line. Today, in his series on Why the Cross Can Do What Politics Can't, Erwin Lutzer is in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. He's discussing what to do with guilt.
You know, my wife and I had an alarm clock, one of these that beep, and these digital gadgets. And it was beeping in our bedroom every hour, and we toyed with it and couldn't get it to stop beeping. So I said, I'll put it in my study. That was about 5 or 6 months ago. Now, every hour on the half hour, I still hear the beep. But you know what? It's not very loud anymore. And one of these days, that battery is going to give up the ghost and say, I'm finished. That's the way the world says handle your conscience. You feel guilty. Let it die like a battery so that you no longer hear its screams or its whistle. Learn to live with it. Become hard. Just do it. Actualize yourself. That's one way. The other way, of course, is to drown it with drugs and alcohol. You know what Christianity says? That there is a way to be washed. The nature of the cross that we take into the world actually does cleanse the conscience. I mean, imagine having committed these sins. And these are terrible things. And there are people who are listening to this message who have done some of these things, and maybe even worse things. And imagine being washed by God, cleansed. You can get up in the morning and you can look into the mirror and you can see yourself because inwardly you have been made clean. Now, where can you find that? In our political agendas here in America. You can't find anything like that. That's unbelievable. I mean, that you will be washed. Some of you, bless you, you live with fear that someday your past life is going to come up to haunt you. And you wonder who knows now and who might find out. Once you have been washed, you give all that to God, trusting Him that even if the lid is blown off your life, He'll walk with you through the experience because He really does love you. And if He washes you, you are clean. You are washed, Paul says. You were sanctified. That is to say, you were set apart. Imagine people having committed these kinds of things, and they have a mark on them that says, set apart by God for God. Special handling. Jesus said in John 17, I sanctify myself that they also might be sanctified through the truth. Set apart by God. And then he says you are justified. You're declared as righteous as God. Thanks to Christ. You gave Him your sin and He gives you your righteousness and you make it into the doors of heaven. Welcomed by Christ Himself. I love to tell the story of Roger because he was with us. Actually, I looked up the date. It was about 6 or 7 years ago when he came to Moody Church. He had been a homosexual prostitute. He estimated 1,500 different partners at least. He was dying of AIDS. He married a young woman, and miraculously, she did not catch that virus. But I did an interview with him because I found his story so fascinating as to how God saved him out of such a life. He was gloriously converted, and then it took him 2 years before the Word of God cleansed him so that he was able to give up totally his desires that he had in his unconverted days. And now he radiated the peace and the freedom of God. That refers to him. And such were some of you. He died later of AIDS. He had it when AIDS was the kind of thing that if you had it was a 2-year death sentence, basically. And now he's gone. But I imagine him coming into heaven, not through the back door, but welcomed through the front porch by God, declared as righteous as Christ. What hope. What a gospel that we have to carry into the world. That is so much better than simply trying to get people to change their lifestyle, however important that might be. The fact is, how can you reach inside and change somebody who perhaps doesn't want to be changed, who's been told that he can't, and who feels the sense of self-condemnation about the kind of secret life that he is living? And now suddenly God comes and washes him and sanctifies him and declares him righteous. What is the bottom line that I'm trying to share with you today? It is simply this, that if we want to change the world, it will happen through the proclamation of the gospel outside these walls and the purification of the church within these walls. You see, not all of the problems in America are really the fault of those humanists and those liberals and those Supreme Court justices and all the people that we target. It could well be that the problem is much closer to home. Do you remember when Jonah was out on the sea and he encountered there a mighty big storm and the ship was battered and they didn't know what in the world to do, and so they decided to toss this guy over? Actually, he volunteered. Jonah had a suicidal streak in him anyway. Later on, he wanted God to kill him because he didn't have the nerve to do it himself. He said, "Lord, smite me dead. I can't take all this grace that you're giving to other people." But you know, it's interesting that the storm was not the result of the pagans. It was not because these pagans were worshiping their pagan gods and God hurled a storm out of heaven because he wanted to teach them a thing or two about those awesome idols and those gods. That's not what happened. The reason for the storm was that there was a disobedient prophet who was going in the wrong direction when God gave him clear guidance as to what his will was. You know, Jonah wasn't those kind of guys who could look to God and say, "God, I do your will, but I have no idea what it might be." Many of us say that, but God says, "Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh." That is very, very clear. And Jonah said no. And God says, "Because of you, my servant, the storm is coming." That's what the problem may well be. And while we expend a lot of energy